Hi everyone, my name is Hannah. I'm an 8th grader from Jenny High School for the Gifted. And before summer talk, I just like to say a very big thank you to the organized committee of TEDxICS and also my mentors, Mr. Jack and Mr. Matt, who accompanied me on this journey and gave me this wonderful opportunity to be standing on this stage. Thank you.
Let me start with a number. The odds of you existing the exact way you are now is estimated to be around 1 inch 400 trillion. And that is just from your parents, one sperm, one egg, and a million different possibilities. If even one of these different possibilities had come up differently or missed, then you wouldn't be you. Or it was a different sperm, a different egg, then you wouldn't be you. But this doesn't stop here. Going back one generation, then another and another, you will find that you have thousands and thousands of ancestors who had to survive the right amount of time they did, who had to meet the exact right person, and they had to make the same right choices, just so you're sitting in this room today.
And let's stretch this back to the beginning of life.
The odds of you existing in this universe is estimated to be around 10, followed by 2,685,000 zeros. And for comparison, then the number of atoms in this universe is 10 followed by 10 to the power of 80 atoms. So if before you thought that you were unlikely, then now you know that is just statistically absurd, and it is a number that is barely comprehensible. So in other words, you are quite literally a miracle that happened. But let's do a different kind of math. The total average life expectancy is 72 to 73 years. Let's say you live for 80 years. Let's break this number down. You spend about 26 years of your life sleeping, and when you subtract this from the original number, you have 54 years left. If you have a standard full-time professional career, which is around 15 years, then you will have 39 years left. At school, commuting, family obligations, chores, downtime, or the things that you didn't really fully choose in your life. And you realize
The time that you have that is actually truly yours is so very small.
And let's get a bit more personal. I'm 14 years old. I have 4 years left until college. And while at first this may seem a while in the present, right? But when you think about it, COVID-19 pandemic spanned for over 3 to 4 years. And to almost everyone in this room, that time passed by like a breeze. Let's take another example. You're 20 and you're in college. You only get to see your parents a few times a year because, especially if you're studying abroad.
Let's say you had 5 years with your parents, and let's say your parents only live for another 30 years.
That totals up to 150 meaningful visits. Only 150 meaningful visits the moment you start adulthood and for the rest of your parents' lifetime. And you never know which direction life drives you towards, where you get a job, you move out, you start a family, you get incredibly busy.
So these 150 meaningful visits might very well decrease over time. So here's the problem. We all know life is short, right? We heard it a million times from our parents, from our families, from social media, from our friends, etc. But in the status quo, it doesn't change how we live. Why? Because of one very annoying, very vague, and oddly safe word that people find relief in. Later. I'll do my homework later. I'll wash the dishes later. I'll call them later. But every time you say later, you're essentially subtracting from a number that is already so very small. But if I'm being honest, I do this too, constantly. There have been things or conversations that I have pushed to later because I do not want to feel this certain way at this certain time. Or there have been things I wanted to do that I pushed to later because I don't know if I could do this at this time. But this word later, it only brings us relief and safety today, but at the cost of tomorrow. There was the turning point in my life that changed my perspective 180 degrees. At primary school, I studied in a private school. And when I transferred to middle school, I had to move to a public specialized school where I had to adapt to a completely new environment with new expectations and much more pressure than I did before. Especially since the specialized school, they criticize students for getting scores of below standards. And because I had a rather relaxed, laid back time in primary school without attending a lot of extra classes, then I was very depressed, and it took me a long time to adapt to this change. My scores dropped dramatically, and my confidence dropped not long after. And instead of facing it head on, I found a way to escape. Gaming became the easiest way to avoid reality because later showed up again. I'll study later. I'll figure out my life later. I'll fix my scores later. But if I'm being honest, then later is only an excuse for me to choose not to act. But after a given point in the second semester of sixth grade, I started to change my way of thinking. We had 3 years of middle school, which is roughly 1,000 days, which sounded like a lot. But when I asked myself, how much of those days am I actually using well, then the answer is quite shocking. If I spent 4 to 5 hours a day gaming while avoiding reality, then it would total up to 1,500 hours a year. And in 3 years of middle school, that's over 4,000 hours gone. 4,000 hours gone. Can you believe it? And that's when I realized that that kind of time usage does not change my life, but rather intention does. And when I realized that, I made the decision to stop waiting and start to take small and intentional initiatives in my life. I chose to study even when I didn't feel motivated to. I chose to face the subjects that I once avoided, and I chose to live my life with even a little bit more purpose instead of living by default. And slowly, these numbers started changing. But the biggest change here, it isn't about my scores, because obviously scores isn't the most important thing in the world. But the most important thing here that I realized is how I see time. You could either spend a day procrastinating or doing useless things, or they can invest their time into more balanced tasks and live a more meaningful life. And once you realize that, then you will essentially stop waiting for motivation and start moving forward with more and more intention over time in your life. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pick one person, like whether your mom or dad, or one relationship or one thing that matters to you the most. I want you to ask yourself, how many more dinners do I have with this person? How many more weekends do I have with them? And how much more time will I see them before we will have to part? I want you to put a number to these people and aspects in your life. And I want you to sit there and reflect on it. And you have free time. Because these numbers, they will tell you what words can. That your existence is already so astronomically rare, and that the time you have in this group is given more limited than you thought. And the future you want starts the moment when you stop saying later and you start counting what's left with intention. Thank you.